I'm a guy that's 25. Lego Star Wars is my life. I like Ryan Johnson. I'm Rich Boy J. Hello boyos, Rich Boy J here, back in with another video, and today I'm going to be showing you all how to incorporate lights into your Lego builds for the cheapest way possible. A lot of you have been asking me how I achieve such extensive lighting throughout my mocks, and I'm excited to finally show you guys how you can take your builds to the next level by incorporating lights. First things first, I want to thank Minifix for You for sponsoring this video. They just dropped this new Captain Rex figure on their website, and this thing is insane. It trumps the official Lego figure in detail and accuracy, and costs about a third of what most people are asking for the official one on the aftermarket. Definitely go check out all the awesome minifigs on their website. My Vardos build was the first time that I used lights extensively in one of my large scale builds, and after seeing how much of a difference it made in the quality of the build, I knew I would never do another build, especially a large scale one, without incorporating lights. Lights are such an effective way to make your build stand out. They're relatively cheap to implement, and they can really help give your mock a life of its own. I'm first going to walk you guys through the materials you're going to need for this tutorial to start adding lights to your builds. Altogether, these materials cost around $42 US, excluding shipping and taxes. I'm also going to throw the links to the Amazon pages for all these products, so if you want to just go ahead, head over there and get everything you need. That will all be in the description of this video. First thing up has to be the soldering iron. This is 100% the most important thing you'll be using when making the circuits you'll need to incorporate lights into these builds. If you hear the word circuits and you're kind of discouraged by that, it sounds complicated, don't worry. There's basically like one or two important rules that you need to know to be able to do this, and that's pretty much it. Like, it's not anything super complicated that you have to know by way of like wiring circuits to be able to do what's going to be shown in this tutorial. The other thing I wanted to let you guys know is if you're a young person watching this, I heavily recommend you either get an adult to help you out with this or to just do it for you completely. The soldering iron can get extremely hot. It can get up to like 400 degrees, the one I have. So it's not something to be played around with. It's definitely something you want to be extremely cautious when you're using. This is basically the tool you're going to use to wire up the circuits you need. And like I said, it's the most important thing you need. Soldering kits on Amazon are super cheap. The one I linked, I think, is about 18 bucks. And the nice thing about this is this isn't, you know, an 18 bucks that you have to spend every single time you want to incorporate lights into your builds. This is an upfront cost, and you can use this for basically any build down the line. Like, I've been using this for dozens and dozens of builds since I got it from my Vardos build. The next thing you're going to need is your actual soldering material. This is soldering wire that is in this little plastic tube right here. Whenever you are making your circuits, you basically use the soldering iron to heat the soldering material. It melts, and that's what essentially bonds your wires together. The soldering kit that I included in the link in the description actually does come with some of this. So if you just have a small project you want to do, this isn't something that you're going to necessarily need to get if you're buying the kit that's in the description. But if you just want to have some on hand, I definitely recommend getting this because most kits just don't come with very much of this. And you end up using quite a bit of this if you're not especially proficient with, you know, soldering or making circuits or anything like that. It can be very easy to burn through a bunch of this, so just keep that in mind. Next up is copper tape. This is basically a conductive metal tape that you can use to essentially create the basis for your circuit. This is not the easiest thing to explain without showing you the circuit. It'll make a lot more sense once I actually walk you through how to make the circuit. But this thing is a super crucial part of this. It can be very difficult to try to solder just two wires together. This can basically act as like a base of a wire. So it's much easier to solder a wire to this than it is to solder a wire to another wire. So hopefully that makes sense right now. If it doesn't, just keep watching. I promise it'll make a lot more sense once I show you guys how we're going to solder these things together. The next thing you'll need is some silicone wire. So this, I don't think, is a super necessary part of this tutorial. Like, you can certainly get away with not using the wire, just using the copper tape, especially if you're doing a smaller build. But if you're doing a large scale build like I end up doing, it can be kind of risky to try to run this copper tape, you know, through a long section of the build because it's not super sturdy or anything, like you can tear it very easily. That's where this wire can come in handy. That's where you can, transport electricity from one side of the MOC to the other in a safe way and not have to worry about this tearing along the way. One kind of important thing is the gauge of the wire you're using. I've learned that basically a higher gauge means the wire itself has a smaller diameter. So the one I have here is 24 gauge, and that's pretty thin. It can basically I can run both of these through like a Technic pinhole, or even actually through a Technic pin in itself. So whenever you're getting wire for this, it can be kind of important for you to make sure you get thin enough wire to make sure it can travel through some of the small spaces that you might need for a Lego MOC. Next up is a power source. For this tutorial, I'm using a battery pack. This is by no means what you have to use for it. When I first started doing this is just the battery pack I got, and it's worked for me. It is kind of big, so if you're doing a small MOC, you might want to look for maybe a smaller battery pack. The most important thing is that you make sure the voltage of your battery pack is the same voltage of the LEDs that you're going to be using. I'm specifically using a 12 volts battery pack, so I purchased 12 volt LEDs to accompany it to make sure you're getting basically the maximum amount of brightness from your LEDs. But this is nice and super convenient. The one that I linked in the description actually is a 2-pack of these, so I didn't know that when I first got it, but when it showed up I was like, oh, what a pleasant surprise. I can basically light up like 2 different MOCs if I wanted to. And I feel like these things have quite a bit of range, and what I mean by that is I used one of these to light probably, I don't know, 6 to 10 base plates in my Vardos MOC. Like for my entire Vardos MOC, I only used 2 total of these, so you can run quite a bit of LEDs off of them. The more LEDs you attach to it, that's less battery life you're going to get, so keep that in mind. And if you just don't want to go this route at all, you can always just buy a plug-in power source. Once again, just make sure the voltage is the voltage of your LEDs, and in that case you don't ever have to worry about loading batteries up into these. You can just plug it in and then you're good to go. And the final thing, of course, are the actual LEDs themselves. I have 2 different packs of LEDs here because these are 2 different sizes, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I decide to use 2 different sizes and when I decide to use what size and where. The first thing I want to point out is that I think this was like a 50 pack of LEDs, so that's a lot of lights. Like most of you, for the size builds that I imagine you're going to be doing, aren't going to need nearly this many, or if you do, you're not going to need very many of these. But this pack of LEDs, they're pre-wired, and they're only like $9. So if you just think about how many LEDs you'd need if you wanted to use like Lego's power functions or powered up system, like those individual LEDs, I think there's 2 wired into them, like that can run you $7 to $10. This is a pack of 50, and this in itself is only $10. So if you're trying to use Lego system, I think it's already very apparent that this is going to be the much cheaper way to go. I went ahead and pulled out 2 of these LEDs so I can show you the sizes. So the smaller one right here is basically a 3mm size. The larger one is a 5mm size. And these I use for different purposes when I'm building. The 3mm one is obviously smaller, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's less bright. I've actually purchased some of these 3mm ones that end up being brighter than my 5mm ones. So you definitely can't go wrong if you're only using the 3mm ones, but the reason I decide to also use the 5mm ones is these fit pretty perfectly basically into a Technic pinhole. So if I'm doing something and I need lights to be mounted in some way and I want them to be in pinholes, so I'm using like Technic bricks or something like that, this is the way to go. It fits in there super snug. It's not going to fall out or anything. That is really the biggest reason I decide to use these. These are obviously a bit smaller, and these actually fit right into a headlight brick. They can basically pop right out of the hole that's like the size of a bar in Lego. So if you're wanting to, maybe have lights coming out of smaller areas, that's when I would opt for the 3mm. I've learned that there's pretty much never really a time where I can't use a 3mm to substitute a 5mm, but sometimes a 5mm is too big for something that I'm trying to do, so I need to use a 3mm. So if you need to make a choice, I'd say maybe go for the 3mm, but if you know you're going to be working with a lot of Technic pinholes, then the 5mm is definitely the way to go. It's gonna basically just make it a lot more straightforward to incorporate the lights into your build. Good morning, class. Welcome to another lesson in Boyology 101. Today we're going to be talking about circuits. Now, this might be the least exciting thing I've ever had to explain here on my Lego YouTube channel, but it's super important for you to understand kind of the basic concepts of circuits in order to wire these LEDs for your mocks. Now, I'm not going to give you guys a ton of useless information. I'm basically just going to give you exactly what you need to know to do this for mock building purposes. If you want to learn far more about circuits, go take a class or something. There's two basic components of the circuits you're going to be making. There is the battery and there are the actual LEDs that you're going to be using. So the battery, as you can see here, has a positive terminal and a negative terminal coming from it. The only important thing you need to know about that is it does absolutely matter which end you connect the LEDs to. LEDs will typically come color coded, so you can just match the colors of the wires up with the battery. Sometimes they're the opposite for whatever reason. I don't really know why, but you can always check to make sure you're wiring these correctly by just touching the ends of the wires to the ends of the wires in the battery. If it lights up, you know you got the right terminals connecting. Otherwise, flip it around and then try it that way. There's two basic ways that you can connect LEDs to batteries. You can connect them in parallel or you can connect them in series. For what we're going to be doing, you don't want to mount them in series. The basic rules of circuits tell you that if you connect LEDs to a battery in series, that basically splits the voltage of the battery evenly across the LEDs you connect. So let's say if the voltage is like 10 volts coming from the battery and there's two LEDs, each LED will get 5 volts. What that means for us is that it's actually going to decrease the brightness of these LEDs. It's going to be basically half as bright as it should be. And you can imagine if you start connecting, 10 and 20 LEDs to one battery and it evenly distributes the voltage across it, you're not going to have very bright LEDs. So you want to avoid connecting your LEDs in series. What it means to connect these in series is basically where you take one wire from the battery, one wire from the LED, you connect those two together, as you can see here, and then the remaining wire from the LED, you just directly connect that to another wire of an LED, and then you basically just move on like that until you have the final LED, and then you just directly connect that last wire back to the battery. That's what's considered connecting them in series. What you do want to do is connect them in parallel. Basic circuit rules will tell you that if you connect the LEDs in parallel, the voltage is actually constant throughout the LEDs. So if you have a 10 voltage battery, you'll have 10 volts going across both LEDs. That is exactly what you want. You want a consistent level of brightness, and you want the maximum brightness that you should be getting from the battery. No matter if you connect, 2 LEDs or you connect 100 LEDs, the brightness is going to be the same. The battery might not last very long if you're connecting 1,000 LEDs, but they'll be the same level of brightness, at least for a little bit. What it means to connect these in parallel is to basically take one terminal of the battery, so you can start with a positive terminal, and then connect both of the positive wires from the LEDs directly to that positive terminal, and then you would connect both of the negative wires of the LED to the negative terminal. If you have to, maybe pause the video here for a few seconds just to get an understanding of the differences between these two wiring schemes. If you don't understand how this works at all, don't worry. Up next, I'm going to show you with actual LEDs how you have to connect them to the battery. All right, guys, it's the moment of truth. You've been waiting for this. I'm finally going to show you how I wire up these LEDs to make a circuit. So in front of me, I have my materials. I have my battery. I have 3 LEDs right here. I have my soldering wire. I have my copper tape, and I have my solder over there. It is hot. Once again, if you're not someone who is an adult, make sure you have adults to supervise you, to help you, or to just do it for you. This thing is super hot. I hope I don't burn myself on camera. You'll notice right in front of me, I have a piece of cardboard and I have this little Lego assembly right here. Now, this might be kind of tough for some of you to come to terms with, but I'm basically going to sacrifice these pieces. Essentially, what I do, and the reason I do it, is I take the copper tape and I put it across these two tiles, and I use the Lego pieces specifically because they're just easy to connect. Like, I can, connect this using the anti-studs to any part of the build if I need the wires to be sitting in any particular type of way. If you're not in a position to sacrifice Lego, like I have a pretty good collection, losing these 3 pieces is not even going to be on my radar. You can always use cardboard as a way to connect your wires to it. So if you want to use the cardboard for the bases of your surface, that is totally fine. But I choose to use the Lego pieces just because it's super convenient to just connect it somewhere if you need to make the wires go any particular place. You actually want to make sure you're not doing this directly, on a surface like a table or something. That's why I have this cardboard laying here under it. Whenever you start heating up the soldering wire, vapors and such can, pop off of it, and it will burn, anything that's under it. It's not going to be super bad, but you just don't want to mark up your table like that. The cardboard is definitely a safer surface to do it on, because I'm just going to throw this away after the fact. So first things first, what I do is I take this little assembly right here and I take my copper tape and I undo it a bit. If you buy this specific copper tape that I got, just be careful with it. It's super easy to undo this and have this entire thing fall apart. So you just want to make sure you're super careful with undoing the copper tape, and you'll kind of see why in a second. So just peel some of that off. I'll usually take off quite a bit and then just tear it off and just be like, okay, I know I'm going to use this much right here, and then I'll actually just put this aside so I don't have to worry about accidentally unraveling the entire thing. So now that I got my copper tape, I'm just gonna take a bit of it off this white backing, and you'll notice it is sticky. It kind of feels like very thin foil, actually. But the nice thing about this is it is conductive. So you can use this basically as wires for your circuit, if that makes sense. So I take the copper tape and I'm basically first just going to lay it across this tile right here. This is just gonna serve as like one terminal for the circuit. So boom, you see that. You got the copper tape laying across that tile, and then I'm just gonna do the same on the other side. And boom, there we go. Check that out. So it's not the neatest job, but it will get the job done. We have 2 surfaces for our circuit. So the next thing we're going to do is connect the LEDs to this. My basic rule is, I just connect all the LEDs first, and then I do the battery last. And one safe way you can make sure you never get this wrong is to just make sure you're connecting all the same color wires to one side, and then obviously the opposite color to the other side. And then at the very end, you can connect your battery. As I said earlier, sometimes like the terminals on the LEDs are switched, but if you have all colors on either side, you can easily just test real quick to see which side should be the red from the battery and which side should be the black from the battery. So I'm gonna move the battery out the way for a sec, and I'm going to take my soldering wire right here. The first step for wiring right here is you take your soldering wire. You don't want to just pull all of it out of the tube. You just want to pull out, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6 inches worth. That's what I usually use. And then of course you take your solder, and you're basically just going to melt. I usually will just do as many drops on the copper wire as LEDs that I have. So I know I have 3 LEDs I'm going to be using. So I know I'll need basically 3 drops of solder on both sides for each colored wire. And then I'll also do 2 at the very end because the battery is going to need to connect to this as well. So first we'll start with the battery. You basically just melt the soldering wire on the solder. Sometimes some of it might pop off. That's totally fine, not a big deal at all. But you basically just, you want to let it sit on the solder for a little bit. If you just melt it on this and then immediately drop it onto the copper wire, you're going to get a very flat surface, if that makes sense. But if you let it sit on this a little bit, you'll get a nice little bubble, and it's much easier to connect wires to this than it is just a flat pool of solder, if that makes sense. Another thing I want to say is, I'm not a professional electrician by any means. So if you're watching this right now and like, oh, he's so terrible at soldering, there are much less wasteful ways to do this. I basically just do probably more than I should, just because it's easier for me to connect it after the fact. I won't make any mistakes this way. So now I'll pull out more solder, and we're gonna get the rest of the drops of the solder on this. You wanna let it sit. Also, you can also sometimes blow on it just to get it to cool off a little bit quicker than just waiting for it to cool off. And you also kind of want to make sure you're not in the path of the smoke that's going to be coming from this thing. All right, you can see that we have this side fully finished. So we have one little bubble of solder right here. That's going to be what the battery connects to. And then these three are going to connect to one wire of the LEDs. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And voila, we have all of the solder that we need on this little surface right here to finish up our circuit. So I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of the soldering wire. We're good there. And now I'm gonna start connecting the LEDs to this. So like I said earlier, you wanna pick one side and then make sure all of the LED wires that come to it are going to be of the same color. So I'm just gonna say we're gonna do all the black wires on this side and we're gonna do the white wires on this side. Sometimes you'll buy LEDs and it's not gonna be black and white, like it can be like black and red or black and green, might depend on what color LED you get. So either way, black is usually typically the negative side of the terminal. So let's go ahead and do it. Your basic goal with it at this point is you want to heat up the solder that's sitting on the surface, right? So obviously by this point, these have all hardened up. They aren't liquid anymore. If you touch them, they're not even hot anymore. So you want to heat it up just to get it to liquefy just enough. And then you basically just push the end of the wire into it. Make sure it's nice and sturdy. So you just put that in there right there, take the solder off, and you want to hold it for a bit to let it cool off, and that's basically going to re-harden it back up, and then the wire is essentially going to be stuck in there. So at this point you can see it's already hardened back up. This doesn't take a long time at all, and if I pull on the wire, it's not going to come out. That's the other nice thing about soldering these wires in, is it does create a pretty strong connection. So if you're building a mock that you're going to be moving around quite a bit, if you do a good enough soldering job, you don't have to worry about breaking the circuit anywhere, getting loose wires. The solder should hold up pretty well. So now we're gonna do the same thing with this next one. Once again, we're still using the black wire for this side. Let's go ahead and heat it up. You can see it's already liquefied. Put the wire back in there. Kind of want to reshape it. Make sure it's completely, submerged in there. Otherwise, if it hardens back up, you might be able to pull it just right back out. And it's probably good to go. Pull on the wire. It's good. Move on to the next one. I always will just do a water pull test to make sure that the wire is securely connected. Sometimes you can do this and maybe it's not as submerged as you think it is, and the wire can just come right back out. So you can always just do a quick pull test to make sure you did create a secure connection. Let it cool off a bit, and you can see we're already done with this side of the LEDs. So now we're just gonna go ahead and do the white side. You also want to make sure you don't tangle up the LEDs too much while doing this. So you'll notice I took the same LED that's connected here. I took the white wire and I'm putting it in the same place on the opposite side, just for organization. Honestly, if you end up switching these up too much, they can get tangled, and once they're soldered in, you're gonna have to basically unsolder them to rearrange them and get them organized the way you'd like. All right, got the first white side soldered in. Move on to the next one. See, it didn't let it sit long enough and it just pulled right out. So that's something you want to definitely keep an eye on. All right, that one's good to go. Now the final LED. So I'm gonna actually pull it around to this other side once again, just so it doesn't get too tangled. Wire pull test, it's good to go. It is still a little bit hot, so you don't want to directly touch on it right after it's hardened up. Give it maybe a few minutes or so. But we have our LEDs successfully wired into this, so these are good to go. And we're almost done at this point. Now we just gotta wire up the battery. So before I actually solder the battery in, I'm gonna basically show you how I test this, because I mean, you could obviously just know exactly which terminals are the correct ones. I usually don't like to think that much about it. I'll just do a quick test with my battery for no other reason than to also just make sure you've soldered all the existing wires in correctly. The battery test can just show you like, oh, if one LED isn't coming on, then I've clearly not soldered it in correctly. So you can see the LEDs at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and turn my battery on. The one thing you do not want to do is touch these two wires together while the battery is on. You have opposing terminals for a reason, and you want to make sure that you keep them opposing. That's actually a big reason why I try to keep even these sides as far apart as possible. You will short your circuit if you touch these two together, or even touch both of these sides together somehow. It's not the end of the world, the LED should still work fine. You might have to shut the battery off and turn it back on, but it is just an annoying thing and you don't want to do it. So we'll go ahead and touch these to the ends of the terminal, and you can see we have light. So that way I know black is actually going to, for the battery, is going to go to the white wires, and then the red for the battery is going to go to the black side. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. We touch them together and we have light. This is the magic of creating Lego light circuits. So now that I know which side of the wires from the battery needs to go to which side of the wires for the LEDs, I'm gonna go ahead and get the battery soldered onto the circuit. I'm gonna actually switch the battery back off. You don't really wanna be doing this while the battery is on, only because you can be moving the wires around and you can accidentally touch these two ends together, and that's just not a good thing to do for these circuits. So I'm gonna go ahead and heat this up right here for this end of the battery. A pull test, it's not going anywhere. And then finally, we're going to wire up this red side to the side where the black wires are on. And sometimes you'll notice, if you're soldering and you're just, you fully have the wire and the solder and it's still just not connecting well to the base, you can always add more solder to it. You want to make sure you put enough initially, because once you start adding more, it can kind of become a mess. But it's not the end of the world. You still do have options. So at this point, we actually have a complete circuit right here. So you'll notice that these are mounted in parallel, as I showed you from the photo earlier. Basically, each negative side of the LEDs are all going to one terminal, the negative terminal of the battery, and then the same thing is true of the positive side. That's what's happening over here. And then if we switch our battery on, you can see we have three pretty bright LEDs, which is awesome. This is exactly what you want to go for. And we've just made our first simple circuit. Hopefully after seeing how I did this, you realize it's not a super complex thing to do, especially once you do it the first time and you just have an understanding for how these things need to be wired. This is just super easy and straightforward to do. And now that we have our basic LED circuit, I'm going to show you guys some simple tricks as to how to integrate this with Lego. Now, I mentioned earlier that these 5mm LEDs fit pretty perfectly into like a Technic pinhole. So if you take the LED and you put it into a Technic brick, it could be a long one like this, it could just be a 1x2, and you push it in like that. It basically sits in there perfectly, and then when you turn it on, boom, that's what it looks like. It makes for a very nice light. I've used this in so many different ways. One of the cool tricks you can actually do with this is you can take like a 1x1 trans piece of really any color, and you can put it in front of this, and that way you can get colored lights. And I feel that really opens up your capabilities with this. So if I take like a blue one of these, it'll make a blue light. And basically, you can just choose from any of these pieces to get a varying degrees of colors in your mock. The nice thing about this is that you don't necessarily have to, go by the color LEDs that you want. In fact, for my mocks, I've exclusively only purchased white LEDs, and then I've just used Lego trans whatever pieces in order to get any other color that I've wanted. So it's a nice way to just add to the capabilities of the LEDs that you use in your builds. And then obviously, if you want it to be even more bright, you can connect more of these through the back, and you have a row of lights. It's super awesome, super useful. These things are quite bright. They're actually not even as bright as they should be. I've had the batteries in this battery pack for quite some time. But I think you'll be pleasantly surprised whenever you get your first circuit wired up and you realize, wow, like these things are exceptionally bright, especially for the price that you're paying for them. So all in all, this is just a win-win situation when it comes to the price, when it comes to the functionality. It's really going to take your mocks to the next level. Another quick thing I wanted to show you guys is how I use these smaller LEDs. These are the 3mm ones. So I typically will get like a 1x1 brick with a stud on the side, and you can basically run these up underneath the bottom, and then you'll see that they actually kind of pop out of the hole right there. So that's what I meant by like the bar hole that these can fit through. And then similarly to those, you can actually just use the 1x1 trans whatever pieces to get a specific color that you want. And I also mentioned earlier that these are super versatile because you can basically just use this size to substitute this size. So obviously these bigger 5mm LEDs aren't going to fit in this. So if you want to do something like this, you're going to have to use these smaller LEDs. But if you wanted to use smaller LEDs for what I'm doing here, you can just keep this same assembly and you can pop this in like that, and it'll basically work the same way. You can still put, a 1x1 trans whatever piece up under in front of this to even change the color of it. One thing you'll realize when trying to incorporate LEDs with Lego is it's usually not the most straightforward thing. Like, you're gonna have to sometimes think outside the box to get the wires to run the places you want them to run, or to get the lights to where you want them to be, since Lego isn't really made to have wires running through them. You're gonna have to get a little bit clever with your building techniques. But I think as you're kind of forced to design around these, you'll realize just what is capable with the LEDs and incorporating those into Lego. As you progress along, you can end up even making something like this. This is a light fixture that I made for my Star Killer base mock, and I'm literally just running one of these bigger 5mm LEDs through this. So you can see if I just open up the top here, you can see the LED actually just sitting in there. So I just push the LED up into the 1x1 brick with 4 studs on sides. I have another one at the bottom. I left a little space in here because the bottom of the LED is a little bit wider than the top, so it doesn't fit perfectly in there. And these sections right below the LED, these are basically kind of coated in some sort of silicone wrap, because that's where like the resistor is or whatever. So those need a little bit more space to breathe, essentially. So that's why I left that gap right there. And then the rest of the wires just run through the holes going all the way down through here to the bottom. So I could easily just take these 2 wires, connect them to this circuit, and then the light comes out of the top here. So like I said, there's so many capabilities. Once you start trying to build around wires, you'll realize what you can do and just how much freedom you have to start really making your mocks look awesome. All right, and lastly, I wanted to show you guys just how powerful the lights are, just how much of a difference they make on an actual build. Here I have an elevator that I designed for my Star Killer base mock, and if we turn on the lights, you can just see how big of a difference that makes. Just look at how awesome this looks. I got Captain Rex standing here with the 501st, and the lights just make such a big difference. If you look at the top of this thing, you can see that I have kind of a wiring mess going on here, but this is kind of the circuit that I put together here to have the lights connecting into the ceiling of this thing. I actually am using that same technique that I just showed you, the one using like Technic bricks, and I just have it kind of connected snot to make it a ceiling, and then you can see that's how I have the lights coming from the ceiling in here. So hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of inspiration for how to do these types of things. Another quick thing I wanted to show you guys here is why I actually included actual wires as part of the materials that you might want to have on hand for these types of things. So the circuit that we made earlier, I didn't use any of the wires. I basically just used the copper tape as wires, as you can see here. And I did that with this as well, but you can see I actually have a red and a black wire coming from this. The reason you want to do this is specifically, like, this is an elevator, right? This is going to be moving throughout the build. So obviously I don't just want to, you know, have some copper tape hanging loosely off of this to get it to run to the battery. So what you can do then is have, you know, the copper tape here as basically your two terminals for this subsection of the build. And then I'm running two wires off of it. And you can just actually pretend these are the wires that come from the battery. There's just extra wires now. And then I have them connect on this side to the battery. And what that allows me to do is to basically, you know, have wires going to multiple sections of the build. So like if I wanted to have 5 elevators, I could just run, you know, 5 pairs of wires from this thing to various areas of the build, and they could all run off of this one battery. So that's how you can effectively use a combination of wires as well as copper tape to basically just get power to various sections of your build. Like if you're building a large scale MOC or just anything that requires you to need wires a bit longer than these right here, you could basically, you know, keep this section intact right here with the elevator and then run 2 wires coming from this over to this as well. So you could have power just going to multiple sections of the build. Hopefully that explains to you why I use the combination of the copper tape as well as the wires. And that's going to finish up the video today, guys. I hope you enjoyed checking out how to incorporate lights into your Lego builds. In the comment section below, let me know if this tutorial helped any of you out. And if you actually implement this into your builds, please hit me up on Instagram. Show me some photos about how you use this video to help you take your builds to the next level. If you like what I do, go ahead and support the video by hitting the like button, support the channel by smashing that subscribe button, and I'll be back again very soon.